Folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our next Zimperium webinar about the risks in mobile DevSecOps journeys. My name is Krishna Vishnabhatla. I'm the VP of Product Strategy at Zimperium, and I'm joined by Andrew. Andrew, thank you for taking the time. Why don't you just take a minute to kind of introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Krishna. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Snyder. I lead the team for the Maps product, which is our application security protection suite. And I think today we're going to be talking about a bunch of interesting risks and how we sort of approach the problem. So hopefully we have a good conversation. We're always happy to answer questions. So start thinking about them now as we get going.
Thank you, Andrew. So just to start, I think it's safe to say, I think mobile has become the chosen digital platform for enterprises and consumers, right? I mean, I look at my phone every day, over 126 apps, which I'm not quite sure how they got there. And we live our lives on these apps, right? And the more we talk to enterprises, especially the Fortune 2000, right? For them, mobile apps are tremendous because it's a huge productivity play. Right, if you see a lot of the surveys and the feedback we get, 34% increase in productivity. And on the other side of the business, when you look at businesses focused on apps for consumers, it's a tremendous opportunity for growth for them, right? If you have a good app that delivers value, you're potentially looking at millions of users using that app, tremendous revenue opportunity, and you can do so many things. So a lot of opportunity for enterprises and consumer-faced business on mobile, right? It's convenience, and it's the platform that is removing the most friction from our lives. So it's been absolutely pivotal to our lives. Andrew, how much do you love your mobile phone?
I love it so much. No, but seriously, it is both important to characterize this as, of course, enterprises are adding mobile. Of course, we all use mobile for lots of interesting, unique, and sometimes fun things. But this is also for mobile-first organizations, companies that have sprung up over the last couple of years or the last couple of months that aren't an enterprise. They're just a fast-moving, fast-growing startup or company that has pivoted, and they are mobile only. They are in a place where they're not interested in maybe infrastructure or putting in big, heavy systems. They only want to exist on your phone, and they can be very successful and very global with that. And so certainly at Zimperium, that mobile focus is really strong for us, both for enterprises that have been around and are implementing DevSecOps, as well as for smaller companies or startups that are growing really, really fast, who lives and dies by the power of their mobile app and their mobile technology.
Yeah, 100%. And that's interesting because I mean, we focus so much on talking to customers in the fintech, biotech, right, tech space as well. And when you look at some of these apps, and I'm looking at my phone, I have over 10 apps that manage my financial health, right? They're apps that are provided by healthcare providers, right? I schedule doctor appointments and so many different things. And I think apart from the business aspect of things, right, it's really concerning when we start thinking about when things go wrong within these apps, right? What's at stake? I mean, the first one that always comes to mind for me is this fraud, right? Identity and financial fraud, because it's scary to think about how many apps on my phone know me, right? Know my name, where I live, social security, driver's license, what I do, where I go, right? Huge target. And financial, right? Whether it's where I bank, who holds my loans, who I invest with, all of these things are via a mobile app. And it's when I sit down and take a minute to think about if this was compromised, how much of disruption there would be in my life, even just for me and my family, I think it's tremendous, right? I mean, I know you and I talk about this quite a bit. I mean, what do you think about when you think about just kind of things getting compromised? I mean, what comes to mind?
It's interesting. As a consumer, I generally feel, well, I'm covered. My bank will make me whole, so to speak. Like if they get exploited, just like credit card fraud, like that's not on me, that's on them. But someone is absorbing that cost. And so as a consumer, I think, well, I'll probably be okay, except in the worst possible case. But for an organization whose business stands on the, we will take care of our customers, we will keep their information private, and we will weigh the risk of exploit and the costs associated with that with the tools that we buy, well, that's a story that we tell a lot. We want to talk with folks to make sure that they've considered their risks as well as the tools that they're using to balance that risk. And so absolutely, in financial fraud and identity and fintech, banks, those people are very focused on being very aware of what's at risk and how to protect it, for sure.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point, right? Is since we feel that the liability is on us, that we won't pay for it. That's actually not true, right? One way or the other, the bank or the company is going to recover those costs from you, whether it's fees, overdraft fees, some special fees. Either way, you will pay for it, right? And I think that kind of gets lost in the shuffle. I mean, I think about, the new paradigm post-COVID is just work, right? Work from home or remote work and all these hybrid work models that we're settling into going into 2022. Mm-hmm. And without my mobile phone, right? How would that work, right? I need to drop off my kids, pick up my kids in the middle of the day, go get something, life happens. And without mobile and being able to communicate and stay tethered to the world, it's really difficult to have work-life balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly as we talk through the couple of risks that we've laid out, we of course have a perspective on this, but our sort of overarching goal is that everyone is at least aware that they should be paying attention to this, right? There's lots of solutions, there's lots of vendors, there's lots of things that different organizations care about. And, we're going to talk through kind of some of our perspective on that. So absolutely.
So let's start here, right? And this is something that we talk a lot about to our customers and prospects about how mobile apps are different. And this is important because I think this sets the stage when we talk about does your DevOps journey look like? Where will you invest, right? What problems are you trying to solve? Mobile does bring some interesting challenges, right? Most companies, small or big, come from the web app world. And we've inherited some things from that world. But there's some things that are fundamentally different. And if I just look at some of these things, right, easier and fast to build. Everyone that we talk to today in the development world, right, talks about modular development, right? Using third-party code, SDKs, library to build faster. They don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? Mm-hmm. The second one, I think, is something that's near and dear to you. So why don't you talk about the code being available?
Yeah, so if you think about a mobile app, and as a consumer, great, you get it from an app store and you can use it for what it was designed to do. It's also completely available for inspection by a hacker or a bad guy or a bad actor or a nation state. Now, it's not likely much of what we have is maybe of interest to the worst of the worst, but it is trivial to pull down an app from an app store, essentially cut it open and take a look on the inside. Now, some organizations and applications, that's totally fine, not a big deal. Some organizations, that's like the crown jewels, and needless to say, you protect those. And so just from an awareness perspective of like, oh, it's pretty hard to do, it's not. It's very easy for someone to inspect anything that you put out onto the public internet and know it to its nittiest, grittiest details. And so if that matters to you, that should go into your risk profile for sure.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing I really realized talking to a couple of prospects was they don't realize a lot of these tools for inspection are either free or less than $100 a month, like even the advanced ones. So this isn't some $1 million tool you need to purchase, in the dark web. These are tools that are really very easily available and affordable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, another one, need to be downloaded and installed. This is, I think, in the consumer world, when we're talking about apps, I see my friends saying, yeah, they're on the web, but the same app is available on your phone as well, right? And we're like, okay, it's available on your Mac and your iPhone, for example. But guess what? In the mobile world, you actually have to download something onto your phone, right? So this is important because then the network comes into play. Your network speeds come into play, right? And that's something developers think about. If the app's too big, the network's not fast enough, will people be able to download my app? And that's something developers have to think about. Run on end user's device. Andrew, why don't you talk a little bit about this? Because I think we've had some fun conversations.
So, at the edge, there's lots of interesting things. Now, of course, mobile apps run on your phone, but that phone is like in your pocket. It's essentially your digital world. And so applications can do very interesting and creative technical things, sort of going sideways to other applications. Kind of take a look around on your phone if you allow that, particularly if you're the sort of person that likes to sort of live on the edge and jailbreak or root your phone. A lot of these security bets are off. And so it's just more of an awareness. This is sort of an awareness of, this is pretty straightforward. Krista mentioned earlier, like these tools are not a dark art to go find. It's like push a button, point it at an app and take a look. And so that is, we're just trying to gauge, we're not trying to gauge, we're trying to bring awareness. And certainly as we talk through these couple of risks, when we talk about the life cycle, it's have a plan and execute it on it over time. So let's, yeah.
Good point. The last one, work without internet connectivity. I think this is an interesting one because web, if you think about any web application, without the internet, you can't get to the application. But mobile's different, right? Even without connectivity, you always have access to your app. And there are a lot of areas, like when you think about critical infrastructure and other areas where the apps are built to work without connectivity, right? So the implication is that you have to be able to hold a lot of data, even in the lack of connectivity. So that brings the aspect of, while we're storing a lot more data, we need to keep it secure. But that's another fundamental difference. As developers start building these apps for these certain use cases and industries, you have to think about these things as how much of data are we holding on to? What are we doing when there's no network connectivity? So these are some interesting differences that we've seen play into where should I invest? What would my DevSecOps mobile journey look like? So, when DevOps, DevSecOps, I think the general rhetoric in the market, if you Google this term, has been around automation, speed, quality, right? We kind of seeing that, hey, you need to automate as much as possible, secure your DevOps, your build pipeline, and so on. But what Andrew and I found fascinating is if you just look at the same pipeline, but with the lens of, well, what is your risk appetite as a company, right? And when you start there, I think it allows you to start looking at your DevOps journey with a slightly different lens, right? Andrew, your thoughts on, the benefits of looking at it from a risk appetite perspective?
Yeah. So some of this comes down to, you almost work your way backwards. And again, operate and release over here on the right. And of course, this is also over time. But it back in the day, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it might just be you write code and you release it. Now there's maybe some gates or some pathways you've got to go down to be allowed to release. And so certainly large organizations often have a very structured manner where you can't get out unless you tick all these boxes. And so you've got to inject security as far back into the process as possible, so that sometimes called shift left down, into the design phase, where you can appropriately implement security versus, let's say, slap it on at the end. Security on code is not like you build this beautiful thing and then you wrap a blanket around it and you hope it's warm and safe when you release it. Apologies for the metaphor, but that just means the blanket can be ripped off. You've got to inject your entire effort with security that's balanced on your risk appetite. And I will say, I'm not going to tell you what your risk appetite is, and that's a little precursor to what we're about to talk about, but this is have the thought loop in each stage of your build system, right? It's not enough to put it into the deployment stage. It's likely not to put enough into the test stage. And so as we build more products and applications, continuing to drive the what is our security risk profile, what is our risk appetite further to the left is definitely a valid exercise. If you're not on it to begin, and if you are on that process, continue to push it left, so that you can have as resilient a posture as possible.
Yeah, and so, going into the 5 risks, right? What the way we've relayed these things out is over, talking to a couple of hundred customers and prospects about DevSecOps journey, and especially the mobile DevSecOps journey, there were 5 things that kind of stood out to us, right? And these, rather than tools and products, they were more about just how we think about things, right? Our attitudes towards security in the mobile space or in the mobile app space. And that's kind of what we wanted to highlight is most of these companies that we talk to are either at various stages of their DevSecOps journey or about to start, or they're in a mature stage. But the conversation that we have with them, there are always a couple of things that stand out to us, right? And the way they look at certain things is where these risks emerge, right? So let's talk about a few of these things. Number 1 is not building security for your real world. So what does this mean? A lot of times when we talk to customers and prospects, especially building mobile apps, whether it's for employees or consumers, when we ask them, what are you protecting against, right? I think the first and foremost fundamental thing that everybody gravitates towards is standards and best practices. So you have the likes of OWASP, GDPR, you've got NIAP, you go to these things, which is great, right? They are good starting points. But when we ask them things like, well, do you know what's really happening to your app out there? Right? Most of the times the answer is not really. Right? And this is something we've seen constantly come up, is just lack of visibility once they publish the app to understand how someone might be attempting to break the app or might have been successful in doing so. Right? And this is an area where we constantly are helping our customers understand why they're different, right? I think on the development side of things, enterprises are very familiar with, code reviews. You've got source scanning tools and you have people looking at those things and CI/CD pipelines. But once the app's published, right? What then, right? Is someone downloading and abusing your app? Or during runtime is someone abusing your app, right? So I think knowing in the real world, what is your threat vector, right? Are you at risk of losing information on the network? Or should you be most worried about compromised devices? What is it that you should be worried about? Having some real world telemetry is extremely important, right? Because this allows you then to do some threat modeling.
Yeah, and I'd say in addition, I mean, sometimes we'll talk with folks, and again, it's sort of like they're looking for the big easy button. Like, just tell me which button to push, and then I can be secure. And often the response is, well, you need to tell us a little more about what you care about and what you're doing, so that we can inform you best on how to secure your real world. Like, I can just push a button and say, yep, it's secure, but you know what matters to you. And that's what we talk through and work with, because usually it's not either a one size fits all, or the same tool brings the same value for every customer, tool or solution, right? And one of the nice things about being part of a platform solution is we have 3, 4, 5 different tools that all bring additional capabilities to bear, and then we fit it appropriately to your need. And so certainly from a risk perspective, don't assume that what a competitor or someone else that is doing is the same thing that you should be doing, because your real world is different than theirs.
Yeah, 100%. Andrew, why don't you take this one?
I do love, of course, we have the hoodie. I should have put my hoodie on, but when we talk about hackers, we think of guys in rooms with hoodies on. Now, frankly, these days it's a different universe, but many companies don't think like hackers. They don't think, what's the worst that can happen? why would someone want to break my app? What is it that might be interesting to steal? Or am I a Trojan horse for a different attack that might have happened on someone else's phone or elsewhere in the phone? And so this is similar to the move left perspective. But if you think like a hacker, and I like to play this game with customers and with prospects, you play the what's the worst that can happen game. And so if you can put your finger on something that would be really bad, you can determine in what ways you are protecting against that. Because unfortunately, for people who do think like hackers, they only have to create one exploit, whereas the defense has to protect everything equivalent. Like they've got to have 100% coverage. The hacker only has to find one entry point. And so again, it's a bit of a cat and mouse. But if part of your DevSecOps journey is think like a hacker, you will potentially come up with some new ideas of like, well, I never even thought about it. Why would someone do that? Because you're thinking like an enterprise. If you think like a hacker, you think, okay, I can see how someone might think that. Let's at least have a considered response if that something were to occur, or are we completely exposed to that sort of risk?
Andrew, every time we do these surveys and we ask, customers and prospects, just what is near and dear to you that you must protect? It's almost always data, right? But we have seen that there are things beyond data worth protecting. Why don't you spend a minute going to talk about, things that you've advised customers on because they might be overlooking it and just being too focused on data?
Well, data, and again, I'll balance this with how I feel as a consumer. I believe that my data is being protected if it's inside an app. I'll say one risk to an enterprise is I'll just leave. Like I'll vote with my feet and I'll churn and I'll go to another company. And so that's part of it. But data, data is the thing that the hacker can sell, right? People aren't exploiting your app because they frankly care about you. They're exploiting it because they want to get something that has value that they can sell and exploit, or inject malware into this. So they can show ads instead of being your ads or your app, it's theirs, and they're able to capture some value. But we all read the internet these days. Data is the new oil, or data has true value that can be expressed, and so you better protect it, or someone else is going to take it from you. And that's a little bit. We don't really talk or sell on the, oh, this is scary, you should buy security tools. But a clear-eyed awareness of the world that we live in is a perspective that we come from. So I can talk about this for a long time. I won't spend more time on it right now, but data is important, and you should have a plan to make sure it's being protected both on device as well as elsewhere.
Yeah. And we run into this a lot of times, right? And this is a reality, right? I think we hear it this way, right? I just want to be compliant. Oh, I really want to be secure. And what do you think is driving this notion? And what is this difference, right? Where are people coming from when they say compliance versus security? What's your thought on this?
So this is a good one. And a lot of times this comes out of either a regulatory environment where you cannot release or get approval to be released unless you are compliant. Or some construct where you're being pen tested or you're being evaluated against your peers or against a standard, and there's someone who says you're good. Now, my rub is with people who want to be compliant, because a lot of times regulations lag the market. They maybe are not fully understanding of the reality that you're in. And if compliance gives you a sense of security, you could be sorely mistaken, right? A compliant app can be hacked potentially just as much as a non-compliant app if the compliance regulatory construct is insufficient. Okay, so what does all that mean? There are certain organizations, or like, let's just take payments in fintech or working with the FDA or something like that, where you can tick all the boxes, and yet that may not be a balanced security posture, and you still get hacked. And so that's where we get into this push and pull, where it's like, well, I was compliant, but that doesn't mean you're secure. Now, you don't come to us and say, well, hey, Andrew, I want to buy some stuff that will make me secure. And we'd say, well, let's work through you with that. We can help you build solutions. We can deploy software. But then you essentially have the inspector concept. Like if I built my house, I think I did a great job, but I don't get to live in it or get my permit or whatever the final is until the inspector comes and says, you're good. Now, security is specifically designed to not necessarily make you compliant, but they know that you are effectively protected against the hackers, the universe of existing tools. Now, you want to be both, which means part of this to roll this all forward is aim for both, to be both compliant, but at the same time, be secure. And so that means sometimes talking with vendors, talking with the inspector concept, the pen testers or the regulatory bodies to understand compliance isn't always enough. And a lot of times security solutions that will make you compliant are not nearly as strong as those that will make you secure. And maybe their price is lower, or maybe they have a subset of features, but they'll get you to tick the box.
Yeah.
If I had an encouragement for people that I work with, tick box security isn't. And so, we're happy to talk with you. We're not always the solution, all cards on the table, but our goal is to create secure environments and customers that have confidence in their security. So
Yeah, well, for sure, right? Goal is to be both. This next one is one of my favorite ones. Security teams, when we talk to them, have the right intention, right? Even development teams, most of my friends who are architects also tell me the same thing, is that, we do, they all agree that they do need to protect themselves and their apps, right? Their companies in hostile environments or untrusted environments, right? And that's great, right? The intention's there. But when we start talking to them about, so in your world, right, in your industry, for the use cases you participate in, what is hostile, right? And that is where we start kind of seeing the conversation is not as comprehensive as we would like to see, right? Obviously. And this is where we spend a lot of time with customers and prospects to say, if you are in fintech or healthcare, right, and you understand what your crown jewels are, right? It's my data, I have proprietary code, there's patient data, whatever. If those are your crown jewels and you're in some form storing or processing or transmitting them in a mobile app, then this is what hostile means to you. And I think a lot of folks, to cover their bases, will say, I'm protected, I'm covered against jailbroken and rooted devices, so I'm good, right? That's typically where our conversation starts. And from that point on, it's us kind of sitting down with these teams and kind of understanding, okay, so let's kind of break that. What kind of devices do you run, right? What about unsecure networks, right? What about other malware that could be, breaking into your app or stealing credentials? And when we help them understand the different vectors that affect them on mobile, right? Better understand what a bad neighborhood looks like when you're operating on a mobile device. That's when they really start comprehending the different vectors or how big the problem is. And that's been really helpful for customers, because it's not that you have to do all of it. Like Andrew said before, we're just trying to help them understand, what do you have to really deal with? And then you can choose what vector, what attack surface to address first and move on. And knowing, essentially those conversations are converting unknown risks to known risks, right? And then you can address them one by one. And that's been most helpful for our customers, because that will drive where you want to invest as well. Andrew, anything before we move on to the last risk?
Yeah, I would say that one's also, your definition may change over time, right? Like this year or last year, I dare say what you cared about and what your security posture and risk was totally different than it is this year.
Good point.
Be it COVID, be it whatever. And so having this thought over time, you should expect things to change, regulations to get tighter, security bars to get higher. And so even though you think, and you may have ticked the box now, there's sort of a rinse and repeat every quarter, every half year, every year to go, oh, look, this is the modern state of the world. These are now the risks that exist in hostile environments. What is our response to those risks? Yeah.
Great. I think my security solutions are working. I love this one. Andrew, why don't you take this?
Yeah, so, and Krista talked a little bit about this earlier, but again, I sort of characterize, in a very simple sense that, you build a mobile app, you have an idea, you're excited, you get it approved or tested or secured, you get it in an app store and you put it up onto the internet and you start to have customers. And that that bundle of bits that's been released out into the universe is kind of like a bird that has flown the nest, it's gone. Perhaps never to return. You have no idea where they've gone, what it's done. If you don't have an understanding of where it's gone or landed or nested, to stick with the metaphor, there's a level of maybe not misunderstanding, but a lack of understanding that is not helpful from a security posture. For example, it would be nice if you were a banking app, you knew, hey, I've got these, say, 2 million customers, and are they being hacked? Or are they being attempted to be hacked? Are they being attached to debuggers? Are they in countries where it's known that there is, let's call it, technological challenges or likelihood that you're going to be attempted to be broken? Getting that awareness, getting that telemetry, getting those threat analytics from a deployed app is enormously valuable. Now, there's some very interesting things that we do with this, but it's also that's a good example of a year ago, 2 years ago, you might not have thought, well, I want to deploy my app and then I want potentially almost real-time understanding of my deployment and who's got it and what phones are they on and all of this. Well, you can get that now, and you can do it in a privacy-sensitive way so that you get actionable data and can make decisions going forward. Now, this sounds a little bit like a sales pitch, and I'm not intending that, but from what do I know about my app after I deploy it? That's the point. If you don't know anything, that might be a consideration or a conversation you might want to have. If you're like, I know lots, this is great, it's feeding into my decisions, I'm pushing it back into my architectural review, and I'm getting my design team to consider what we've learned from this deployment, that's great too. The point is, the risk is not knowing anything, and likely having an understanding of what's going on is going to it's going to go from sort of a good idea to a suggestion to a requirement as we move forward.
Yeah, for sure. So just to kind of summarize, I wanted to we've talked about 5 different risks, right? And you see all of them. I wanted to take a few minutes to kind of talk about our experiences with customers who are dealing with these things, and then where are they in their maturity and what problems are they addressing, right? So I'll talk about the first one, not building security for the real world. I spent a lot of time looking at traditional banking and a lot of fintech organizations, right? And in traditional banking, when the big guys did all of it, right, they typically have some form of obfuscation and some form of source code scanning that they've invested in. But then when they say, okay, that's great, but how do I secure my entire build pipeline? One of the things that's obvious to them when we talk to them is they just don't have visibility once the app is published, like Andrew was saying. And if you think of banking in general, right, the big concern is because these consumer-facing apps, one, run on Android, iOS, 2, millions of devices, right? So they're running on different hardware. And for some of these banks that are global, right, it's a bigger problem, right? Because you have to contend with also regulations. What are you doing with the data? How secure you're keeping with data? But for them, it's all about, I can't see what happens once my app's published, right? And they're publishing, now at the rate at which I see updates, it's almost like once every 2 weeks, there's an update to my banking app. Right. So for them, where they focus to start really building their DevSecOps journey is, I want visibility in the right places. What happens once I publish the app? Mm-hmm. What happens when it's running, right? What type of attacks am I seeing? Am I running on compromised devices? Am I running on vulnerable devices, right? Should I really be worried about rogue networks? So it's that type of telemetry that really helps them secure their entire life cycle. Andrew, how about you take risk 2 and 3?
Yeah, I was gonna sort of squish those together, and some
Yeah.
of it I've already talked with on risk 3, but at least for number 2, enterprises don't think like hackers, and the word that comes to mind is imagination. I don't, if we were to generalize, perhaps enterprises don't have a lot of imagination. They're big, they're stable, they're moving as fast as they can, but they almost tend to be characterized by being big, which is maybe not imaginative. And if I were to imagine a hacker or a hacker team that says, you know what, just for fun, we're going to go break this app. They're going to be as creative as they can think. They're going to have imagination and likely consider something that you haven't. And that's that single entry. Now it can be, we think, well, it's always hard to guard against every attack vector, but that's why you have a layered security posture. So you at least can block it. You can fight back, or you could be aware of it. And even if you are hacked, it's like, okay, well, the app should be self-aware enough that it can shut itself down or blow itself up, or as I like to put it, shoot a flare back to the mothership to say, I was just hacked, I'm not going to work anymore. Because what an enterprise and a company that's not an enterprise cares about is that the app works the way it should work every single time, or frankly, it doesn't work at all, right? It has been designed to work. And if it's exploited or malware or injected or something ripped out or something stuck in, then it ceases to function. And you've anticipated that with your user experience as well as working with your customers. But that takes some work, that takes some imagination on the enterprise side, on the business side, to say, what would I do if I'm exploited or I'm being attacked? And so that's part of sort of risk number 2, that you don't think like a hacker. I would encourage some imagination. Sometimes we only know what we know because we know it. Having some imagination, some consideration of what's out in the world can be really helpful. The other one that's near and dear to me, which we mostly already covered, but I think of, this is often with small companies. Well, I'll just characterize as small companies. A lot of times small companies have an idea and that's their entire business. And they're trying to bring it to market. If they wander off the secure path into the compliant path, they could be out of business once they launch, because unfortunately, they don't have a proper posture for the real world. And so sometimes you have to balance time to market and speed with making good security decisions. And that's a balance. I totally get that. And at least in terms of our perspective, you want both, which might mean you have to slow your roll, so to speak, a little bit, but you are confident that when you are in market, you'll be able to survive and thrive, because it's a big world out there.
And it's interesting to me, and we see this with a lot of customers, right? I think coming from the web app world, we're so familiar with scanning source code. Oh, we want to use some kind of freeware for obfuscation. But we see so many doing one versus the other, right? We talk to so many customers who are like, yeah, we scan our source code, we're good. And they don't obfuscate, right? They don't protect their source code, right? I think, and this is where, like you say, don't think like hackers. Sometimes I'm like, yes, your data being compliant is important, but your source code is proprietary at times, right? If you lose that to your competition, there goes your business model at times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I'd even say, and again, when I tell lots of stories and try to paint pictures that aren't technical, but this is also, like you mentioned, open source tools. Better than nothing. I'll just say, if you're going to release perfectly written code that can be easily reverse engineered and read and just recompiled, great, or not great. Anything beyond that is an improvement. Now, with lots of tools, you kind of get what you pay for. Open source tools, almost all of them are known to be easily reversible and sort of a better than nothing option. If your business is professional grade, working with customers, storing valuable information, the level of tool you use to protect it should be equivalent to the task. And in my experience, something that you can just kind of find and implement and do for free or open source or even very low cost is not an effective deterrent against a even moderately interested hacker. that
Sure.
there's a balance of what you want to spend and the effort you want to care on it, but it's also one of those interesting things. We talk with customers who on their security journey, they're like, we're good, we have confidence, and we've talked with them, and then either they get hacked or exploited, or their competitor does, and they realize we are behind. We need to step up and move forward. So love to have those conversations.
Yeah, and the other interesting one is hostile environments, right? I mean, we work with I think digital identity verification platforms is something that I think about when we talk about hostile environments. And we live in the sharing economy. Think Uber, Lyft, whatever, Oyo, Turo, all these sharing economy-based businesses, right? They're onboarding people on their mobile apps, right? Because people, if you're an Uber driver, for example, I can sign up for Uber today, and then I can say, I'm done with Uber tomorrow, right? But the onboarding of a lot of these people is happening on their mobile app, right? They're submitting so much of personal information to get into the Uber ecosystem. And all of this is entered in a mobile app, sent somewhere else, processed. And when you talk to these identity validation companies that are helping these businesses based on sharing economy, that's what they're thinking about. Your phone might be vulnerable, it might be compromised. You could be sending this information over a free open network, right? How do we secure this, right? Because that's a big part of their business model. It's not just, they're not thinking, oh, does my name and my social match my biometric? They're like, this information that you're providing via a mobile app has to go back and forth in the utmost secure manner, right? So that's another great example when you talk about hostile environments. That's another whole industry and business case that we work with because it matters, right? The hostile environment really matters when you're going back and forth with communication. And anything you would like to say about, the last risk? Any
No,
comes to mind?
I think we sort of covered that when talking about the security for the real world and the awareness after it's been released to the universe, but not thinking it works, but that it works. That having that level of understanding is really valuable. Yeah.
So one of the things with these risks, one of the things we highly encourage everyone, right? Wherever you are in your mobile DevSecOps journey, right? There are certain things to think about, right? So step back, look at what you're doing in each of these spaces. Like think about, am I doing threat modeling, right? Am I thinking beyond data and thinking keys and source code, right? Am I just scanning my code, or should I be thinking about testing my binaries, right? How do I augment pen testing? So there are various things for you to think about when you start looking at your DevSecOps journey and figure out how to further secure that pipeline. From a Imperium standpoint, this is kind of our vision. Unlike a lot of other companies, what we're attempting to do is say, hey, it's not development or runtime. It is really how do we secure your entire mobile application lifecycle, right? Because there are different risks that emerge in each space, and it's important to recognize them and then address them in a timely fashion. Yeah. With that, let's see if there are any questions. I don't see any. We are at most of the top of the hour, so let me move on. So, folks, again, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. If you would like to learn more about our experience with mobile DevSecOps journeys, what we've been learning, how we have been helping customers, feel free to reach out to us at info@zimperium.com. If you want to talk to Andrew or I about some of the experiences we had and chat more about this, we're on LinkedIn. Please find us, message us. We're absolutely happy to connect. And with that, thank you so much for attending today's webinar, and I look forward to providing more content to you all very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.